white girls doing this. But yeah, I do believe that only Black girls should be doing this style of majorette dancing. Today we will be discussing the majorettes, or the conversation that kicked off with the announcement that majorettes have made their way to the University of Southern California. I haven't seen like deeply negative critiques of the girls. Like, I think it's beautiful that a young Black woman at whatever college she goes to, whatever school she's in, whatever institution she's fighting her way through, had an idea, was able to make that idea happen, and to then get the backing of the school. So I'm not saying that these girls are inherently wrong. I don't know that the commentary necessarily I want to lobby directly at them. But I think this idea that we aren't allowed to have the conversation that's derived from this, I don't know about that. Majorettes are not necessarily unique to HBCUs. One thing that I think is interesting about this is the globalization of Black identity that has happened on the internet. And what we do have to understand now, and I wonder, is there a way to set boundaries in this conversation, like within the zeitgeist of also like sort of, I don't think it's a diaspora war, and I don't want to peddle in that, but I do wonder when Black Americans are having a conversation that might be slightly critical of the way our culture is moving and who's gaining access and where our cultural movements are showing up at. Let's start with what's even happened. So on September 18th, I'm sure most of you have seen it by now, Princess Lang posted on Twitter, "Oh, nothing. I created a majorette team at a PWI and performed at our first game. Truly, though, I am blessed and can't thank God enough. Thank you to my parents and to everyone who supported me along this long journey. And my girls, Faya, the Cardinal Divas of SC, are up next." Now, I want to talk about what majorette culture is, what makes this part of Black culture. What does it mean when people say this is HBCU culture? Majorette is largely an overarching term that is used for dance teams that perform with the band. And at a PWI, a majorette, because of the type of music that the band plays at games, is much more traditional music. You know, it's a lot stiffer. It's a lot, more rigid. It is what it is. Now, I think it's very interesting that that video was posted with such a short clip, because what comes to majorettes at HBCUs is that it is distinctly a byproduct of HBCU culture. It is not just this largely broadly thing of Black culture. It is a part of Black culture, but it is a regional section of Black culture. So majorettes are one part of a HBCU cultural movement, in that the HBCU marching bands is a very unique byproduct of Southern, historically Black college and university culture. You can't have Black majorettes without the marching bands. And I think we're having sort of this argument that's just come down to, I think it's okay for Black culture to exist at PWIs. Yes. As a person who both went to an HBCU and to a PWI, there's no way for Black people to exist in any space and not bring some of their culture with them, especially at a time in your life where you're coming into your own identity, you are living on campus, you are spending the majority of your time, in this community. Yeah, you are going to bring your culture with you. That's fine. But the majorette culture that people are trying to pinpoint as something that can possibly be gatekept, or that should be gatekept, is really part of a broader cultural note. It is that HBCU bans are a byproduct of the lack of funding that HBCUs typically receive. And so many of the schools, when there was, I think at some point, some HBCUs were able to have very competitive athletic teams, but it wasn't something that was consistent, that could be kept up in the same way that a University of Alabama, and that like an Auburn, these are both Alabama colleges, Ole Miss, University of Michigan, these schools can build and really put a lot of money into their athletic departments because these are very, very profitable parts of the school structure. HBCUs broadly have not gained that access. Interestingly enough, a big influence on HBCUs has been Earth, Wind, and Fire, which is a musical group that came out of the 1960s. You know, the 21st day of September? But in the late 1960s, early 1970s, we have the start of majorette teams at these HBCUs as the band world of HBCUs starts to take a shift that's inspired by the musicality of Maurice White and the Earth, Wind, and Fire band, and they start to draw a larger audience. And then we also have like the history of how these games are even being televised and Black TV networks popping up in the United States that are able to broadcast these games that have largely been left out of mainstream television. And so we get the FAMU bands, and then we get the majorette dancing styles that come out of Southern University, which has become a lot more popular in recent years, and then the J Setters, which is Jackson State University majorette team. So majorettes are a part of a whole product rather than just being the product themselves. You have to be playing modern R&B, blues, Black music that allows the girls to move in a certain way. But majorettes and the style that's become celebrated and the style that's become more culturally known because of Beyonce's Coachella performance comes from Southern HBCUs. It's a very specific faction of Black culture. What you see kind of pop up across schools outside of Southern and Jackson State is an amalgamation of both, where Southern is much more elongated, sort of highly feminine and fluid, and J-Set is a little bit more aggressive. It's like boom, boom, in your face, and still, you know, doing those very precise movements. And so those are the two schools that put the cultural product on the map. I do have a big question about, since majorette culture is so reliant on the band and it's really a byproduct of the band, what does it mean for these young girls to take a cultural product and bring it to University of Southern California? Some of the argument that cropped up around this is, oh, well, everyone can't go to HBCU because HBCUs are expensive, and, you know, some people have to go to state schools. And this is not a state school. I don't want to see white girls doing this. I don't personally know how they can bring this program to the University of Southern California that really, really prides itself on diversity and D&I programs and making sure that everyone has as much as the school can paint it. I don't know that the school genuinely is giving equal opportunity and equity to everyone, but that if somebody complains that they have done the work, they auditioned and they couldn't make it in, especially because they're still performing with a band that's broadly paying traditional PWI band music. But yeah, I do believe that only Black girls should be doing this style of majorette dancing. And then we get into this conversation about, like, I don't even know if gatekeeping is the right word, but when we hold our culture sacred, have we as African Americans ever truly been allowed to hold our culture sacred? Because even as I say these things, I feel like, oh, I'm just making a silly argument. But, like, why can't this be a sacred aspect of our culture? Now, some of the arguments that I have seen in telling people that we are wrong for being inclined to want to gatekeep or protect culture has been comparing the movement of Black cultural, or really more specifically, Southern HBCU cultural products to a PWI, is that D9 organizations are at PWI. D9 organizations are not inherently HBCU products. They are products of Black middle class, right? In that you had to get access to college, and so they are a byproduct of a certain class of the African American community. Even then, there is a different culture for D9s at a HBCU versus at a PWI. When people are like making the argument that the D9 also lets in white people and that we largely celebrate the white people that are allowed in, I want to say most people are referring to this. This video has 9.1 million views. the white boy in this video of Kappa members of Kappa Alpha Psi doing the shimmy is colloquially referred to as Sam Whiteout. And if you were around back, I feel like this was 2015, 2016, you remember I was very anti this man being platformed. Sam Whiteout, I believe he crossed at University of Pennsylvania, and his ability to become relevant in the Black community, largely Mark Lamont Hill is to blame. Mark Lamont Hill is also a member of Kappa Alpha Psi. I don't know where that man crossed that. That's not a shade comment. I just actually don't know. But he is from Philadelphia. I am 10 out of 10 very against the way that white people are allowed to perform Black culture and be celebrated for like doing it decently, because these are national organizations that also have to fight to get to be allowed on PWI's campuses, right? They legally cannot exclude non-Black members from joining. Once you let these white people in, why do they get platformed? Why do they get highlighted? Ain't nothing special about that man's shimmy. All right, his shoulder blade's a little loose for a white man. Who the fuck cares? It's not to say that HBCUs are the only purveyors of Black American culture, right? It's not to position HBCUs as the institutions that bring about Black culture. You know, another part of the conversation that can happen is, what does it mean and who are you really building community for when you are only bringing the majorettes to your PWI? One of the other sides of culture that is derived from HBCUs is that HBCUs were founded as a means to train Black folks on white Protestant cultural norms. These are not radical institutions. These were not institutions that were built to produce radicals, right? And they are elitist in nature, and many of the byproducts that come out of them are elitist in nature. That very much so includes the D9. But that would also then include like majorette culture, because you're not going to see queer and non-binary people. You're not going to see a diverse range of body types represented. You are often asked to fit into a very narrow aesthetic in order to be seen as a good dancer. And so majorette culture without the band, to me, isn't really a community building project. It doesn't build community for the Black community as a whole at whatever PWI they pop up at. I don't want to say, because I'm not trying to say it's about Princess. You know, girl, you should celebrate. You should be very happy and very proud of yourself. But it is sort of a veneer project. It is sort of a project that allows a very, very specific and small clique of people to feel elevated on the campus. I don't think that Princess is gentrifying, Black culture, because the community building that these HBCU bands and the whole of the cultural product of that band culture brings, and the community that it builds, means that yes, majorette programs for young girls and young children have popped up. If you live anywhere in the Delta region and on that migration line up from the Delta region, so Chicago, Indianapolis areas, southeastern United States, you have programs for young children to get into dance teams in order to train them so that they can join majorette teams if they decide to go to college. I don't know how, making the comment, oh, well, it exists in the high schools. Well, yeah, and it doesn't exist at white high schools. It largely is programs that exist really in underserved communities, where one of the things that we can do is turn inward to the talents that exist in our community and create these dance programs that don't require a heavy lift for materials and entering into competitions and traveling. If you do like a white dance team for your child, you could be spending $20,000, $30,000 in a year just taking your child around to the various competitions, to the sort of materials. I think because the product builds community, that then offshoots of that product exist in the community for earlier ages to begin to prepare them, because the HBCU band is a very big deal within the HBCU ecosystem. Some of my own friends are like, stop hating and saying that we can't have Black culture at PWIs. You're right. People shouldn't say that you can't have it. I think it's natural inclination. And a lot of people that are revered in the Black community went to PWIs, right? There are there are products out of, just the fight that Black people had to make to get into these programs that creates cultural movements and cultural products. I think the comparisons to, well, Beyonce commodified the Southern HBCU culture for her performance at Coachella, and that pushed it into the mainstream zeitgeist. I think the interesting thing is to hear that argument made in 2022 when Beyonce's Coachella happened, and there was a running joke that in 2018, most of the white people that were watching the show had no idea what was going on. They did not get the cultural references. White people did not walk away from that show and said, wow, I really like that style of dance. I'm going to bring that style of dance into my community. Also, Beyonce directly, a lot of the band, a lot of the performers on the stage were from Jackson State, from Southern, and quite a few of the smaller HBCUs in the South were featured in the performance at Coachella. And even, you think about it, the girl that was a twirler, I think she was from Clark Atlanta, Nigerian American, but she's in the Clark Atlanta band. And so it's not that we can't, that the culture isn't allowed to expand, it isn't allowed to let anybody else in. But it is that I don't know. I just didn't see Coachella as this thing that now white people are going to buy into. The other byproduct of why I think the conversation kind of went the way it went, because a young lady on TikTok tried to make the analogy that Cornell, which is less than 8% Black, felt like a HBCU to her.
University is an HBCU in my mind. Let me explain. Even though it's only 8% Black here, it's a pretty big school and you see Black people everywhere you go. The Black Student Union has so many events, and there's a whole Black residence hall. It's called Ujama, or Ujama, however you pronounce it. This school is known as the Social Justice Ivy. If you wanted to be around only Black people your whole entire experience here, you can definitely do that. I don't really recommend it, but it's possible. I've been here for about 2 weeks, and so far I didn't feel the well-known imposter syndrome. Maybe because I'm a tad bit entitled to academic spaces, I feel as though all Black women should be. I feel really safe here. The crimes here are not too dangerous where I feel like I want to go home, and I've only been catcalled here one time. I've heard the winters here are tough though, so I won't speak on that yet. If you're thinking about applying to Cornell as a Black person, especially as a Black woman, I definitely think you should.
Babe, you've been at Cornell for 2 weeks and you're saying it's the HBCU. It's giving HBCU vibes. A PWI can have Black culture exist, especially because we want to build Black community at a PWI for our own safety, for our own enjoyment, for community building. But we don't have to correlate the beauty of that Black culture that derives from a PWI. It does not need to be in competition or in correlation with what's happening at a HBCU. I think we have to be okay with the fact that HBCUs are just inherently very different. There is a very different culture when you go to a school that is majority African American. And that is going to be different than if I go to a PWI, even if I feel really good about the community that I have access to at a PWI. I think that's great. I think it's great that you're happy, but also I think when you start trying to contrast it to an HBCU and make it, especially Cornell, that less than 5 years ago, a group of African-American students issued a letter about how, Cornell was pumping its diversity numbers with international students and not doing the work to curate programs and engage with high school students from low income, economically disadvantaged, and underserved communities to give students in America, minority students, and particularly African American minority students, the access to the program. I don't think my opinion or my critiques, and I honestly don't think even the broader critiques that might be happening on the internet are at a level where they could be detrimental to the prosperity that these girls might be seeking with their program. Thank y'all for tuning in, and I can't wait to read all your thoughts. I'll holla at y'all later. Deuces.